Miranda Evans has lived most of her life in a small town in northern New Hampshire. From early childhood to an old age, she never ceased to admire the beauty of the majestic forests and deep rivers of her native land. Miranda Evans was born in the midst of World War II, when hundreds of volunteers rushed to the battlefields in Europe. Among those brave and desperate warriors was her father, who went to the front not under duress, but at the call of his heart. Unfortunately, Bill Griffin died in the storming of the coastal defense lines in Normandy, never even knowing that he had a daughter. So all Miranda had in memory of her father were a couple of black and white photographs and a medal in a box, which he received posthumously. Needless to say, it was very difficult for Miranda and her mother Clarissa to take care of the household on their own at first. But the older the girl became, the easier it got for her mother, who never remarried. Clarissa Griffin was one of those women who only fell in love once. She cherished her deep love for Bill for the rest of her life. Days, months, and years flew by at an incredible speed, and Clarissa didn't even notice when her daughter had grown. Gradually, Miranda took over managing the household and taking care of the chores, which helped the women keep the house in order. And even when the young woman got married, she didn't stop visiting her mother, coming over several times a week. Years went by, but Miranda continued to care for her mother with the same respect and love as before, even though her health was deteriorating quickly. By the irony of fate, Miranda's mother passed away a year before her beloved husband did, who undermined his health by working in hazardous environments. Thus, in just 1 year's time, Miranda Evans was left all alone in this world. Due to an unfortunate genetic condition, Miranda and her husband couldn't have children. So after her husband's death, she decided to move back to her parents' house. Everything about that house was so familiar that Miranda truly felt at home there. She involuntarily felt a surge of strength and energy that the nature of this wonderful land gave her. Local residents were sympathetic towards the lonely woman and helped her in whatever way they could. Someone would get her medications, others would bring firewood, and someone else would clean the chimney. Time flew by, and in addition to the gray hair on her temples, Mrs. Evans grew to be respected by the locals. And one day, one of the neighbors brought the old lady a nice but rather unusual gift. "Here, Miranda, take this. Trust me, she'll make an excellent guard. I know a lot about dogs, so you can be sure," said Mr. Edwards, handing the old woman a basket with the cute little dog napping inside. "Wow, thank you, Peter. You're spoiling me," the old woman replied with admiration, and carefully took the basket from the neighbor. The dog turned out to be a cross between a mongrel and a hunting dog, which allowed the little thing to inherit the best features from both parents. Mrs. Evans named the dog Betsy, and first of all brought her a collar with a metal tag with the pet's name engraved on it. To the old woman's surprise, the dog grew obedient and affectionate and almost never gave her any trouble. Having such a playful and loyal pet alleviated Mrs. Evans' loneliness, filling her life with joy and meaning. Betsy was more than just a friend to the old woman. The dog served her owner loyalty and has become a full-fledged member of her little family. Betsy never left Mrs. Evans' side and accompanied the old woman everywhere. One fine spring day, Mrs. Evans woke up earlier than usual. The woman was in a good mood, and she wanted to quickly finish the household chores so that she could go to the forest for brushwood for the fireplace. The weather was beautiful, and the old woman felt light and cheerful. Affectionate sun invitingly shone over the windows, and Mrs. Evans couldn't resist the temptation to go out into the yard and bathe a little in the warm rays. In the meantime, the old lady decided to clean up the yard a bit. Humming to herself, she picked up the garbage left over from the winter and last year's fallen leaves. Suddenly, the woman heard a quiet, plaintive squeak coming from the fence. At first, Mrs. Evans decided that it was just her imagination, but then the old woman came closer. She saw some kind of a fluffy lump on the side of the fence. "And who do we have here?" Mrs. Evans asked quietly, trying to get a better look at the tiny animal. To her great surprise, it was a little fox. The fluffy cub moved its sharp-nosed muzzle from side to side and cried pitifully. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, Mrs. Evans noticed some movement in the bushes. Taking a closer look, the old woman saw an adult fox, who apparently was the mother of the red-haired foundling. The forest predator looked emaciated and sick. Her fur was dull and was falling out in clumps, and her eyes was full of desperation. On top of that, the unfortunate mother was limping heavily, and her whole appearance suggested that she didn't have much time left to live. Mrs. Evans' eyes teared up when she realized that the mother fox knew that she was going to die soon and deliberately brought her baby to people for the woman to save it. "Okay, honey, don't worry. I will definitely help," the old woman whispered, trying not to look into the eyes of the fox who was saying goodbye to her cub. That's when Betsy, attracted by the strange sounds, came running towards them and began to sniff the fox. Taking advantage of this distraction, the red-haired mother disappeared into the thickets of the forest, never to see her cub again. Betsy happily accepted the little fox and began to lick it. And then, carefully taking the little thing by the withers, she brought it to her kennel. There was more than enough space in it for not only the dog with the baby fox, but even the neighbor's cat with her offspring as well. Mrs. Evans smiled and realized that Betsy's maternal instincts had kicked in. She had 3 puppies just recently, who were all adopted by one of the local hunters a couple weeks ago. Everyone knew that Betsy was more of a hunting dog, and the cubs certainly inherited her abilities. As you know, maternal love knows no limits. And it just so happened that Betsy, the yard dog, became the little fox's adoptive mother. Mrs. Evans named the red-haired beauty Archie, and from then on, she was followed by 2 fluffy tails, 1 dog's and 1 fox's. Several months later, the little fox, nursed by the dog, got stronger and was now firm on his feet. Seeing the old woman walk abound with the fox, the local residents couldn't contain their surprise and only shook their heads in admiration. The journalists of the local TV channel even offered the woman to film a story about her domesticated fox, but the woman refused, not wanting to draw too much attention to her life. Time went by, and of course, the years didn't make Mrs. Evans any younger. Her hair had long become all gray, and her face was covered with deep wrinkles. And as you know, nothing lasts forever, which the old woman was well aware of. One day, a young man and woman came to her house. They introduced themselves as distant relatives of her husband. The guests' names were Beverly and David, and they came to this small town surrounded by the dense forests in order to get to know their distant relatives and learn about their family tree in more detail. With the arrival of the newly found relatives, Mrs. Evans' life changed completely. The young people, who seemed to have immediately developed a deep connection to the old woman, began to help their relative with everything, making her life much easier. Betsy and Archie still lived with Mrs. Evans and were very friendly towards the old lady's guests. Now, with the protection and care of such a large family, the old woman felt safe and confident that her future would be bright. One morning, when Mrs. Evans was feeling particularly well, she decided to go into the forest to pick flowers in a meadow only she knew about. The 2 faithful pets went with her, of course. The old woman had taken similar walks many times before, so it seemed safe to her, and she didn't expect anything to happen. This time, however, Mrs. Evans felt very dizzy and lightheaded as soon as she entered the forest. Unable to pull herself together, the old woman fainted a few minutes later. First, Betsy ran up to her and tried licking her face to wake her up, but it didn't help. Guided by some instinct, Archie ran back to the house where he began furiously clawing at the front door. "Hey, why are you making a mess?" David asked in surprise and was about to chase away the fox, when suddenly, looking into the animal's eyes, he realized that it was a cry for help. Archie led the young man to the meadow where Mrs. Evans lay unconscious. Betsy was sitting next to the old woman, touching the owner's chest with her paws and licking her face. David called the ambulance immediately, and thanks to the timely assistance, the old woman survived. When Mrs. Evans came to her senses, lying on the hospital bed, the first thing she asked about was her pets. "Don't worry, everything's fine with them. You got yourself a couple of great guards there," David replied with a smile. A little later, he told the old woman about what Archie did, how he got help just in time, and about Betsy, who stayed by her owner while she was having a heart attack. Hearing what her pets did, Mrs. Evans burst into tears, realizing that her loyal and loving pets were sent to her for a reason as protectors and guardians. And it doesn't matter that they don't have wings to soar up into the sky. They do have paws and tails instead.